Hi. I am here today, clearly, but what you'll already you'll have to excuse me because I'm a little bit sick. I have a little bit of a cold, so I'm like a little bit soft spoken, so hopefully that's okay. And number two, I'm very spacey, so yeah, I guess apologies for being a space cadet. But with being sick, I've had a little bit of extra time to read, which brings me to the point of this video, which is, what am I reading? And the answer is Jurassic Park, which I grew up watching the movies. Movie. I I think I watched part of one of the sequels, and even as a kid I didn't like it, so yeah, I grew up watching the first Jurassic Park, and I loved it, but I never read the book, so this is my and if none of you out there knew that there was a book, it is based on a book. I'm really enjoying it. I'm finding, actually, maybe I should back up, talk about the kinds of books that I do like, or maybe not. I don't know. I'm like, maybe no one cares. But anyway, there's this scene in the movie Ratatouille. This is a bit of a tangent. But the main character, there's like a food critic, and the main character is a chef, sort of, if you haven't seen it. But there's a scene where the main character says to the critic, you're pretty thin for someone who likes food. And the critic says back, I don't like food, I love it. And if I don't love it, I don't swallow. And without being so dramatic, that's kind of how I am about reading. As an author, I feel like I should read more than I do, but I don't like most books, to be honest. And usually when people recommend me a book, I don't like. I don't really encourage people to recommend me books, because then I feel bad, because I usually hate it. And that's not to say that I have like a good taste in books. I think that I do enjoy good writing, but I have a very particular. I have very particular preferences. So, yeah, for example, I grew up reading kind of more of an older style, which is written in the past tense, which maybe in another video I'll talk a bit more about tense, but what's popular right now is first person and present tense. And honestly, I kind of hate it. And that's actually what my novel right now is written in first person present tense, because that's what's popular, and I want to write what's accessible to culture rather than necessarily my preference in terms of what I like to read. There are some non-negotiables for me, which is I write sci-fi, and the science has to be possible. So actually, my pet peeve within sci-fi, I'm going to say I have two of them. Number one, and the biggest one, is when sci-fi is actually closer to the realm of fantasy. And what I mean by that is people take technology or scientific innovation, and then they kind of twist it into something that is more just kind of like made up rather than extrapolated from what's possible. I feel like a lot of authors just kind of make something up. And if that's the case, I'm like, just write fantasy. Don't call it science. And that's me being super critical, which I can be. So that's why I don't particularly like a lot of sci-fis. I think maybe in the future I'll kind of like do a side by side of like a sci-fi that I really enjoy and one that I don't, because yeah, maybe that would be good. Anyway, blah blah blah. My second is, I'm not into like alien romance or weird sexual things that happen with aliens, and I feel like that's way too common in sci-fi. And I'm like, why? Why we gotta be like that? I don't know. So yeah, that's not really my thing within sci-fi. As soon as it gets kind of like steamy with the aliens, I'm like, I am out. Yeah, but this has neither. What it does have is good science and dinosaurs, which are both amazing. I really enjoy, this author was writing in the 80s/90s, so like published in 1990. And it really, he is taking kind of the height of technological innovation at the time, and it's really, I don't know, this is really high tech for what was there, and making a logical next step in terms of what we can do with genetic modification if we could sequence dinosaur DNA, which if you've seen the movie, we know that they found it from mosquitoes in amber. They like took out the dinosaur DNA, and because we can create organisms now, it was just kind of like to make a theme park with dinosaurs. It was just like a very logical thing. I think what is done well in this book as well is the political and economic aspects of this, and so this is very driven by what to me seems likely and possible in terms of how this is handled within the business world and politically, where the theme park is set is in Costa Rica, so like outside of the view of where the United States has jurisdiction, and there is this entire outside force, which is a competing company trying to get the DNA of the dinosaur so they can make the so that they can make a similar start making similar creatures. So what I think is interesting about science fiction now versus a few decades ago is that a book like this takes, let's see, I'm on page 98 of this version of the book, and they only just got to the theme park. They only just saw the first dinosaur. And what's interesting about that is when I read sci-fi from pretty much like the 60s up until maybe year 2000, is the authors take like 100 pages, probably around that, just establishing the scene before actually kind of even getting into the meat of the story, which this is about dinosaurs. You don't see your first dinosaur until a fourth of the way through the book. And I think for a lot of readers that might feel very slow. I think what it did for me personally was make this realm of reality. So he established what was happening politically. He established what was happening with all of the characters, and they're really realistic characters as well. And so I think that the time taken in the beginning to establish something that feels really real is cool and it's unique, but it doesn't necessarily sell in this day and age. So I've got the kitten wanting to come in here. I think I'm gonna go get her. We're back. She wanted in. She might just want to terrorize the place, but we'll see how it goes. All right, okay. Terror it is. I'll put you down, but don't. Just be good. Readers this day and age, it's a completely different style of writing. What was possible? It was a completely different style of writing. What was popular a few decades ago versus what's popular and what sells now. And I guess probably a side-by-side comparison would be the easiest way to show this. But right now, writers have to get into the story right away. You have to show the characters right away. Whereas before, it actually currently it's considered bad form and bad writing if you take time to like tarry on. It's a term, I've heard it called throat clearing, is if you start telling all of the preface to the story rather than just getting into the story. It's like when you're about to give a speech and you're like, before you give a speech. That's what they consider all of the information prior to the actual story. And so now when you're taught how to write, they say just get right into the story. Kitten's being a pest. Yeah, so now basically the advice to writers is jump right into your story. Don't take time explaining everything before the story happens. Whereas a while ago, that was actually kind of the status quo. And so you read a lot of stories from maybe the last century, and they start with a lot of backdrop. And that's just not how people write or how people read right now. So I will say that if this was published now, I still think it would be a really brilliant story, really brilliant science in here. It really is like top of the game in terms of technology, and I think it's still relevant today. But in terms of readership, I think that if this wasn't popular because of the movie, I think that most people would pick it up, read just a few pages, and they would be kind of like, where is this going? What's the story about? Because really, it jumps around a lot in the beginning. For me personally, what I'm realizing is that he's establishing really good science, and I think I have a long attention span for that, whereas most people don't. And I have a short attention span for like westerns where they're like taking forever to explain like the planes or the cows or something. Yeah, so I'm not trying to say I have like a longer attention span than the normal person this generation. I just think that the well done scientific explanation holds me for longer because I'm interested. And so what I would say for people just picking up and reading this, if you're into really good science fiction, then I think it really does hold your attention. What I'm finding myself enthralled with, which is funny, is actually like the beginning of each section has the exact same quote and then a little drawing, and I don't know what it means yet. And maybe I will in the future, but I'm finding that really fun that it has the little drawing. It has little like graphs in some parts of it. So yeah, it feels really realistic. So anyway, so far I haven't finished it, but I will say would recommend. I'm having a good time with this book. So yeah. That was a lot of me explaining what my reading preferences and reading style is, and maybe a bit about how like genres have changed over the past few decades, and why you might find sci-fi from a few decades ago sounding a bit different than it does now, and in fact my own book having a much different cadence to the language than if you read something from like the 80s, the 90s. A lot of the sci-fi I like goes back to like 60s and 70s sometimes. And yeah, and it sounds really different, just like culture shifts. So does the sound of the way that we write books and the way that similar with like movies, it is different the way that we tell stories. And so yeah, for in terms of preference though, I really do like I really enjoy the long-winded science. I enjoy past tense. writing style. And so for anyone who kind of feels similar, I would definitely recommend Jurassic Park if you haven't read it. If you don't feel similar, but you want a good read, I recommend it anyway. But just be ready that they don't get into the park until a fourth of the way through the book. So, yeah, I hope that was a fun little explanation of Jurassic Park.